Hi everyone, welcome back to First Principles. Today we've got a repeat guest, Jason. How you doing, Jason?
I'm great. Nice to be back.
We want to focus on getting things done or GTD project planning, and let's dive right in. So, what is GTD project planning, and how is it different from other project planning methods out there?
Sure. I think let's talk about it. I mean, we last time we talked about a lot about GTD and getting things done.
Yeah.
The book written 2001, David Allen. So for sets, I think there's an interesting piece to it. We talked about sort of the pillars, right? There's three pillars of GTD just to get everybody kind of rethinking in that framework. We have a pillar that's about getting control and control of your life. We talked about last time. There's a pillar about getting focused. And then there's a pillar about planning. And so this time we're going to put control and focus to the side and just zoom in right on the planning side. And the GTD planning actually is something called the natural planning model. And it's based on, as it's named, really about getting from point A to point B in the way that our brains were made to come up and do things.
Hmm.
So it's not built on Kanban views and all this other sort of planning or waterfall or agile. It's just called the natural planning model.
Sure.
And it's interesting because as a GTD person, you learn about it through the book, you get to understand it a little bit, but as you start to bring it into your life and put it towards bigger and bigger projects or things that are sort of like actual projects, it becomes like very helpful. So I will also say it is not for every project. So let's just start there. I'm not saying the natural planning model is the way you should build bridges or the next skyscraper over in my city here in New York. But for things that can go anywhere from where should we have dinner tonight to software rollouts or projects that are redoing your apartment or getting married. These are in our world of GTD, we call all these things projects. A project is something that has an outcome
Hmm.
and that outcome cannot be done in just one step,
Right.
right? Buying milk, not a project. Having dinner with your friend next week or hosting a dinner next week, that's a project. So just want to frame that because I think when we talk about projects, it becomes this word that everybody thinks about. It's like differently, right? It's like,
Yeah.
what does a project mean? In the GTD sense, almost anything is a project. In fact, we had a debate internally at my company. I did a whole thing about projects, and we had a debate on what a project is. In some ways, you could put a project and say life.
Yeah.
Okay, born, that's the beginning, the first thing, and then all the way through to being buried. That could be the last part of the project. But in GTD, we like to be a little bit more granular. I think it's easier and better, best practice to break down those things into smaller projects that you can see and kind of hear.
Yeah.
And if they're not connected, right? There's things that won't be connected. All right. So that's just the start into like what a project is, what we're talking about, what does a project mean? But let's talk about the natural project model, the natural planning model. So the natural planning model says in a gist, you have an outcome to something you want to do. You have the outcome and you think about that outcome. I think it was Bezos who used to say you'd write the article, you'd write the end story first, right? Like here's what it looks like. In GTD, David Allen talks a lot about writing the blurb in the Wall Street Journal, New York Times about what happened. So
Hmm.
you're thinking about this outcome and you're kind of imagining it. You're saying this is where I want to be. And then the natural planning model, you say you kind of think where you are now, right? Here's where I am. Here's where this far out thing. Here's where I want to be. I want to be out dinner tonight, having a nice glass of wine and being fed a good but maybe semi-healthy meal. Now there's this dissonance that happens between those 2 points, right? I'm not currently doing that. And this is where the natural side because it comes in because the brain, as it turns out, has a really good job of being able to say, I understand where you are, and that's a thing that's not happening, but I can imagine and think about and kind of lay out, I would say project plan, how to get from point A to point B, right? Oh, these are the things that are not true. You're not there. Well, okay, you have to get there.
Hmm.
Oh, you have to get there. How are you going to get there? Oh, what restaurant? Oh, I don't know. What do you want to eat? And all of a sudden, your brain will do this kind of like dance in your head and kind of dance around all the things that are not true, all the things that aren't you actually being at the restaurant, having a nice glass of wine and a nice meal. And it'll start to, if you pay attention to your brain, and we should talk about mind mapping and how that works. It will start to lay out the project plan for you.
Mm.
And now we don't think about these things as project plans, going out to dinner, like, why would you have a project plan? But in GTD, that's kind of what I'm doing. I'm thinking about the dissonance between what is happening now and what that further thing with the outcome that I want to see happen. And I'm letting my brain naturally point out all the things that need to be done in order for me to get from point A to point B. So that's sort of the start of the natural planning model.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
All right.
Great. So you go through this thing, you have this outcome, this bigger goal, this bigger thing. You can actually also always tell a project is a project because you can't just check a box to have it done. You don't check a box called get married, right? There's a million little tasks that happen underneath, and maybe the signing of a paper, there's a wedding, there's a little million things that have to happen before that happens. Or dinner, right? You don't just have dinner. There's a million little things you have to do and pay the check and whatever that happen that make that larger outcome happen. Okay, so first you start off, you come up with your higher outcome, and let's talk bigger projects now, because I think maybe the people your audience wants to think about more like, bigger projects, not just having dinner. In a bigger project, I would say this is the time to think about something like called a mind map. And a mind map is simply mind mapping. It's simply a technique of emptying your brain, right? We talked about that last time, right? The capturing of all the things that come up. And so in a traditional sense of mind mapping, what you do is take a piece of paper or software. I'm probably a little old school, even though I'm the most technical person a lot of people know, but like I'm apparently old school when it comes to paper, or I love a blackboard or whiteboard. Like there's nothing better than a big white empty whiteboard, with like 6 pens that all work. If they all work, that's really impressive. And then just going up, and the idea is you take the thing, right? So let's say get married, and you put get married in the middle in a circle. And then as your brain does this little, whirly around and goes, but you're not married. Oh, I know that because you don't have a location. Location. There we go. Because you don't have someone to marry. Oh, okay. Dating, it could go down whatever path. You don't have a location. You don't have a caterer. You don't have a thing. You don't have the dress. You don't have the musician. And it just goes insane. And off of each of those nodes, right? So you got circle in the middle, and then you go a node, and then you put a circle around that node. And then in theory, off that node, like location. Oh, outdoor, indoor, 2 other nodes, or, city or size or whatever. And you let your brain, and this is really hard because in some ways we don't control our brains very well. You let your brain go through all those iterations and go through every little piece, and you try not to judge. I don't know if you've run brainstorming sessions, but one of the key things for a brainstorming session is not to judge the ideas. Not to go, oh, that's not a good idea or whatever, just to say, get them all out. So you go through this process, you do this mind map, and off each node, and you will find, if you do this enough and you get good at it, it's amazing what you can come up with, right? You could come up with all these things, and your brain will then go from node to node. Maybe it'll bounce between, like it might just not stick on location. It might go, parents, and you might have to write a thing and put parents around it, and then go, or seating arrangement, and then you might. And again, the advice from doing mind maps for a long period of time now is don't get too caught up in the map of it. Don't think like it has to be perfect and the nodes match, or or you can't just take a scribble line and go, oh no, this is over here. Like it should just be free form, no judgments, get it all out. But the idea is you are actually getting out all those pieces. So of what you want to have happen. So and I'll tie back to the GTD planning model, natural planning model. You start at this sort of who am I, why. We call this purpose and principles. We don't really think about it a lot because we always go into our lives with our purpose and principles. We don't change our purpose and principles. But sometimes when you're doing projects with other people, that's good. So maybe if you're doing a marriage, you might want to sit with the person you're getting married to and say, hey, who are we and what are we on this planet and what kind of wedding do we want? And that's like the start. And then you go to this thing called vision, right? That's the outcome. What's the vision? I gave you the vision for the wedding is we're surrounded by love people, friends and family who want to be there, and we're, enjoying it and make lasting memories that we can enjoy for the rest of our marriage. Maybe that's the vision. And you do this thing called visioning. I did a vision with you saying about dinner, right? I said, what would it look like for me to be out at a great restaurant, having a meal and a great glass of red wine? And I'm visioning and I'm seeing where I'm going to be and being fed. So that's part of it. That vision gives you that outcome. So then you do the brainstorm, and that's the mind mapping thing, right? So brainstorming is just getting the data out, whether you want to do a mind map, whether you want to just write it down, whether you want to just, it doesn't matter. I do them in all different areas, sometimes with a piece of paper, sometimes with a Google sheet in front of me, or a document or an image. It doesn't really matter. The idea is you are sort of coming back from that vision and that higher outcome to the project, to the end of it, and you're working yourself back, capturing all those pieces of what they are. So, okay, so we went from purpose and principles. Who are we? What are we? What's important to us? We go to that thing of vision, and we say, what is the vision? What is the outcome? Then we go down to brainstorming. That's just getting it all out of our head, getting all these great, bad, good, terrible ideas. I want to get married with goats. I don't know. Like, you just throw down all the things.
Yeah.
And you go through those first 3 steps first. Then the next step seems really obvious, but is the organize. So you go down to organizing. And in organizing, you're saying, all right, great ideas, lots of stuff we came up with, but we need to put these into buckets, right? We need to think about what are the things that have to do, what things have to do with some things and what things don't. This is where you might throw away some stuff. You might say, okay, that's about the honeymoon, different project. That is about your love of goats. Okay, let's move that off to the side. And you organize those thoughts from a mind map. That's kind of easy. You can look at a mind map and you can go, all right, what are the big pieces here? You are more putting it into structure at that point. At that point, you are giving it some more structure. Maybe you're putting it into your task management system. Maybe you're putting it into a calendar. Maybe you're just taking a long list of stuff or a lot of bubbles on a page, and you're then, putting them into a bulleted list or something. You are giving some structure. You're really trying to organize and a little bit prioritize. Don't get too caught up on the prioritization at that point. So for the example, let's say the dinner example, I came up and I said, I came up with all this stuff and I have this vision, and I said, oh, okay, I need to find a place, and who am I going with, and what time, and blah, blah, blah. And I go, all right, so I have the 4 or 5 things. I need to figure out a place, the time, and the person to go to, right? So, okay, I'm organizing that. And the next step is, and you do that in your head, right? So bigger projects like a wedding, you're going to do that in software or on a piece of paper or whatever. Smaller, tiny little things, you're going to do it really quickly in your head. And then the actual last step to the natural planning model is to come up with that next action. And this is where next action thinking becomes, and I'll kind of do an abbreviated version of this, which is, what is the next physical, visible thing that you can do to get started on that? And it might not be one. People get very caught up on the I have one. No, you can have things that you could do 6 things at once, especially when it comes to something like a wedding. You might have 6 things you could do at once.
Right.
Going out to dinner, maybe it's 1, which is text friend to see if they want to go out to dinner. That's the first one. And they go, yeah, I want to go to dinner. And you're like, hey, what time could you do it then? It's like, those feel very parallel, very sequential. But when they get bigger projects, that's where, again, this is all natural. This isn't like coming from some sort of weird system, but the naturalness is you kind of think, okay, what is the very next thing I need to do? And I like people to think about the very physical and visible. That's the 2 things that keep you into that next action. It has to be something that someone can look at you doing, right? And it has to be something that you're kind of pushing something forward. So, it's not necessarily generally doing more brainstorming. Oh, that could be the case. But if you need to get unstuck about a project, you need to get unstuck what to do. Just think, what is a very physical thing and what is a very visible thing that I could do to move this thing, to get the ball going one piece forward.
Yeah.
And the other trick, I will tell you after my life version of this, I like to think of it something you can do under 20 minutes, right? If you try to make something that's physical and visible, but is also like very long, it can feel overwhelming.
Right.
But if you can break things down into small enough and small enough and small enough pieces, and 20 minutes is a good, we know in the GTD world, there's the 2-minute rule, which is if you can do something in under 2 minutes, do it. I like to say, okay, anything between 2 and 20, that's kind of your next action world. That's where you want to be. You want to be your next action should be anywhere between 2 and 20 minutes. Again, don't hold fast. Don't go, oh, well, it's a 30-minute task. I can't do it. No, that's fine. And if it's 2 hours, that's fine too. But it shouldn't be something, I make the analogy of writing a book. And if you do this for the product of writing a book, I wouldn't say, write book is the first task. That's too big, right?
Yeah.
So you got to break that down to smaller and smaller chunks. And then literally that action, that next action becomes the thing that goes into your trusted system. It becomes the task, the piece. And the last piece to it in the GTD world is to add a context to it, is to say, okay, for the analogy for the restaurant or for the dinner, I went to text friend, right? Okay, where are you going to do that, right? Oh, I need my phone to do that, or I need my computer. I need messages. I need to know the friend who I'm going to text. I need to be able to text them. So you write that context, you capture that context along with the task. And this is why GTD is all about tasks and context, because when you get a lot of tasks and a lot of stuff on your plate, which most of us do have more than we need, it allows you to filter out, right? So I can filter out stuff that if there's an errand list, I don't want to look at my errands list while I'm sitting here at the computer because I'm not doing errands. And that probably took me 10 years to figure out as like the aha moment for context. It also, I think the other hint, and I say this a lot when people are like, well, why capture the context? Like, seems like, why should I write down calls or computer or internet? And I said, well, one is the filtering thing, right? There are times you're on an airplane, the internet goes out. It'd be nice to say, what are the 10 things I could do right now without the internet?
Yeah.
Second thing is, and this is a life lesson tip, it kind of helps you clarify a little bit more what that task is. Because if you have to put a context to it, then you're kind of thinking, oh, it's this, but I'm going to do it here, or I'm going to do it with this person. So I really love using context, and I still use them 20 years later. I'm still write down a context for every one of my next actions, because it allows me it forces me to clarify what that thing is a little bit better. Because if I can't figure out what the context is, then maybe it's not a task, then maybe it's something bigger, or maybe it hasn't been defined enough, or maybe it hasn't been whatever. So from a natural planning model for project, that is sort of the whole, like, from soup to nuts. What do you want me to dig in on what part of that can you want me to dig in on for?
Well, a lot of clarifications. So the first one is, okay, you don't need in a GTD context project, you don't really need to do planning every time. But this is if you want to do planning, right? Because David Allen also says that as long as you have one next action per project and you're reviewing regularly, that's good enough. But this is where you need to plan. Is that correct?
So I would say, again, I like to start with everything as a project, just because it makes it easier for people to, like, well, is owning a dog a project? Yes. It's, buying a new computer project? Yes. If you just say with everything's a project, kind of easier to go with. Of course, not everything's a project. The planning thing you only do when you need to, right? Your brains can do these very fast. You don't have to write down everything. If I talk about going out to dinner, I might not do any of this. I might just, my brain is so fast to do it, or thinking about it, or does it so naturally that I'm not going to go, oh, I'm going to do a brainstorm on where to go to dinner. Like, I don't need to do that. It's just going to happen naturally. I think you have to look at the project and sort of the project size and the importance as kind of where it goes. Again, emptying dishwasher. Sure, I could make that into a project. Go to dishwasher, open up dishwasher, blah, 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 take out things, put things into it. Sure. And does it take more than 2 minutes? Sure. But you're not going to project plan that. You're not going to do a natural, what is my desired outcome on emptying the dishwasher? Well, it's to have the dishwasher be empty. Okay, not a big deal. But when you start to think about it in your life, you think of, like, well, are there commitments around it, right? If there's commitments around it, if there's things that you've either committed to yourself or you've committed to others, that's another reason that I start to have to think, oh, this is actually a project because I'm committed to do this.
Yeah.
And I want to make sure that I'm not just trying to remember it, right? I'm not trying to, this is the whole, capture thing, get things out of your mind, like water, is not to leave things floating around in the mind. So by taking those things out of your head, going, yeah, this is actually a project. Let me, let me put it on a piece. Let me put it out into my trusted system. It does let your mind kind of let go, as opposed to spinning all night, going, oh, I got to do that thing, got to do that thing, got to do that thing. So, clarifying, getting it out, capturing it into your trusted system is important. And then, and this is the hard part. It's like you have to look at each project for what it is and how big of a thing is it, right? Again, I've done projects and I've used my trusted system for run projects that are like traditional software projects, right? Okay, it's going to be bigger, right? It's going to have more to it. I've also like renovated my entire apartment twice by using the same system.
Yeah.
And it might have more, there might be more clarity, there might be more brainstorming, there might be more reference material. That's the other thing. Like I might have some documents or a spreadsheet or a budget or something else. So it doesn't all have to be in that one trusted system. There are going to be references to it. And if you get to like the biggest project on the planet, then yes, you're probably going to, use massive software to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. But even for making a skyscraper, a bridge, the WBS, the work breakdown structure, I think this planning, the brainstorming part at least, is going to be a good precursor to essentially figure out what the WBS elements are going to be. And even for Agile, we've got these meetings every 2 weeks, and this is what we're essentially doing. So I'd say that the natural planning model is embedded into other more traditional project planning models out there.
I agree. I actually don't think you can let's go crazy.
Yeah.
I don't think you can get away from the natural planning model. I think it's what you do every day, 100 times a day. All GTD kind of said is, hey, we've been doing this forever. Like what? Yes, there are other methodologies for projects, right? Agile or waterfall or whatever, it doesn't matter. But this you can't get away with. This is because it's how you kind of run your entire life.
Yeah.
If you embed it or help it, and this is what at my company, we run big projects, multi-month, huge, thousands of hours, big, digital transformations of organizations thing. But you can still use this. You can still go and start off with and I'll say we actually do this. One of the things we do with our prospects and clients is we talk to them about the outcome to start. We say, and I use this phrase all the time. People know me will say, oh, you use that phrase all the time, because I do. I say, if I could wave my magic wand and in, a year or 6 months, what would be true? What would you want to see? Yeah. And that's all I'm doing is I'm getting them to think the outcome. Because then we can also identify the things that maybe they're getting very bogged down in the here and now, right? In the very like software licenses, CRM data. And it's like, okay, let's back up. Let's go up to this big thing and let's go to that higher outcome. Let's talk about your organization being, fully digital transformed, coming from this organization, from this back end system to this. And what does that look like? What are the people in your organization doing? Are you walking around the office or the virtual office? Are they smiling? Are they using it? You're seeing the adoption there. You can even do some of the outcomes that are, more business or organizational outcomes. We've increased our fundraising by 30%, and we've been able to, help this species of bird, go not get extinct or something. You can use it for any of these pieces, but even having that bigger outcome and thinking that sort of vision, I think helps with almost anything, even in a skyscraper,
Yeah. And let me ask you a provocative question. Why is visioning so scary to so many people? I mean, it's essentially, I think it's a cope when people are figuring out about this license and that license and this period and this comma.
I think, no, why is visioning scary? I wouldn't maybe say it's scary. I just think it's a habit and a practice that we've lost. When we were kids, we had great ability vision, right? Sit a kid in front of a piece of paper, give them some crayons or whatever. That kid's going to vision all day long. Going to do rocket ships, going to do whatever, lawns, whatever. We're going to get very, very, interesting things come out of it. Oh, here's a house on top of a mountain with a cave and a bear on top of it. You're like, oh, how creative. As we get older, I think we're given more, boundaries and things you can and cannot do. And so having these big thoughts, I think we just lose the habit, we lose the practice, and something that we don't do as much. and I think the other reason is we don't give ourselves time to do it, right? We're a busy society, we're busy. We're running around, we're, going off in 1,000 different directions. We're texting, we're looking at screens, we're watching TV, we're doing stuff. We don't give ourselves the chance to stop, right? To not be getting all that input that we're constantly getting through our eyeballs into our brain.
Yeah.
And it's mostly screens at this point. And letting our brains, kind of have the chance to do that, to kind of go into that mode. We probably talked about it last time. I talk about it every time. It's like I always ask, when's the time that you always have the thought that you didn't have a thought before? When is it? And everybody goes either sleeping, or about to go to sleep, or in the shower. And I said, well, what are the two commonalities of just about to go to sleep and in the shower? And they're like, oh, I don't know, that makes no sense. I said, well, it's when you're literally letting your brain not do anything else. You're sitting there, in the shower. You don't have 6 screens and a beeper and your phone and whatever. In theory, you've taken all that off. Yeah. And in theory, when you're going to bed, you're not have 6, things coming at you. And so your brain finally is settling down, and then it goes, oh, it has this great idea, or it has this great vision. So I think it's about practice. I think, carve out that time in our lives nowadays is very difficult. And you just have to, make it more of a habit and allow for the time and space to do it. I'll say the most creative envisioning things I've ever done were I used to do deprivation tanks, where you go in and you're an hour floating in a float tank in half salty water. It's like water that has some saltness, so you float, and the water temperature is the exact temperature of your body. It's completely pitch black. You have earplugs in. You can't hear a thing. You can still smell. I will say you still smell. So you still smell, but in theory, you don't feel anything because the water doesn't feel like anything. You're not touching anything. You're floating. You can't see anything. You can't hear anything. I don't know. I've done it like 10 times in my life. And the place that used to do it was right up the block, and it's closed. It's kind of a bummer. I would continue doing it. Amazing. What your brain, if shut down and has no more inputs, where it will go, and just allowing it to go and just go crazy, just go think. I mean, there's 2 sides to it that I thought were fascinating. One, when I first did it, I didn't give my brain direction, and I found sometimes it would go very negative. It's kind of like a dream. You don't really control your dreams. Sometimes you have nightmares. Sometimes you wake up with oh, I had a great dream where I was on a meadow. Now I'm upset because I'm not on the meadow. But the first couple of times you just, I let my brain go, but it would go wherever it wanted to. And it could go very negative. It could think about death, or it could think about, people I've lost in my life, or anger, or whatever. As I got better at it, I would actually go in with something. I'd bring in 3 things, and I'd give my brain 3 things, and I'd say, okay, here you go, brain. You got 1 hour. Oh, by the way, you have no sense of time. It's really freaky. I don't know if you've ever been in a place. The only other time I've had no sense of time was when I was in jail. Longer story, but it's very freaky to not know where time is, how time, when time is start, because we're constantly looking at our watch and thinking, oh, how much time. So you're in this thing, and I'd give it 3 items and say, all right, brain, which one of these do you want to go with? And just let my brain go. And it was kind of, you would sit back and you'd literally sit back and watch your brain, which is very strange, and watch it go through these iterations and think. And I'd kind of be taking notes mentally of my brain as it went down these paths. Fascinating, the stuff it came up with.
Wow. So I haven't tried the sensory deprivation tank yet. That's on my list, but this seems a lot like the old shamanic rituals when they used to go on vision quest. And it's exactly what we are kind of doing in a modern context with kind of the comfort.
Yeah, absolutely. We're all those things, right? Whether it's, you could go for a walk in the woods. Although some people say there's more information in nature. And it really is, but we're more attuned to not getting distracted by the thousands of birds and bugs and trees and leaves. But even, taking 10, 15 minutes, closing your eyes, doing a little mini meditation, all these things from, going into the huts or smoke huts or the heat thing. They're all kind of based in the same thing, which is to get you away from whatever you're doing, to close down the sensory stuff, and to and maybe give it give it some other things. I didn't do drugs while I was doing it, but some of these are about giving it a little help, right? Like,
Yeah. Some people
well,
have psilocybin with it.
yeah. Here's some other things
Yeah.
that can help your brain go to different places. Um, so yeah, it across. If you look at almost all cultures, there's some, or all
Yeah.
all rituals. There's some piece of this kind of quietness, and just letting all that stuff go, so you can get into a space where your brain is doing its own thing.
Yeah. I mean, just as an aside, especially in the Indian culture as well, this kind of quietness is associated with like renunciation and monkhood. But I think it's better to judge it like a sabbatical, where you go and you come back and you're renewed, and then you can have a renewed love of life and whatever you want to do with it. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I tell you, I mean, we could do a whole nother podcast about deprivation tanks and creativity. But one of the things is you come out extremely calm. Like I never could take my watch in because you have to take it off your watch.
Yeah.
But I know that my heart rate got way down. I know I got extremely calm, and that feeling would last anywhere between like 10 minutes to maybe 2 hours, where I would just feel this euphoria and this kind of, and again, did nothing. I feel like just this calmness and this peacefulness and this lack of stress. And in the one I went to, you would go out into a little garden afterwards. You sit in the garden, no matter what time of year, and they'd have tea waiting for you. And so and then they have a book, and you could take the book and you could kind of do some reflections.
Yeah.
And they'd have tea. So I don't even want to drink tea, but I was like, all right, fine, whatever, I'll do the thing. And just that coming from this point where you were just so shut off to coming out, there was like this transition of calm and peace. And I remember I'd walk home, and I'm in New York City, so nothing's peaceful and calm. But I would just walk home and I'd be like, do. And I feel this feeling. It's like, this is amazing. Like, how did I get I got here just by literally being peaceful, by not having distractions, by turning off everything and letting my brain just kind of process its stuff. So it did turn me. I mean, I'm not a big meditator. I do try to meditate a little bit. I do try to take moments at certain times during the day, and kind of just do a moment where the screens and things are not around, and I'm just kind of just shooting off. Might just be 10 minutes at the end of the day, looking out the window, or go for a walk, or it's super impactful. So hopefully I'll give it a shot.
Yeah, I will give it a shot for sure. I have some coaching questions about that, but just an aside question.
Sure.
How do you define meditation? Because you have the Marcus Aurelius book on meditations, and then of course meditation defined in the mindfulness sense and in the yoga sense. What's the common thread for this word?
I think we've been touching on a little bit. The common thread is sort of it is a disassociation from other things, right?
Okay.
In almost all practices, again, I'm not a meditation consultant, but like the commonality I see is you're stopping other stuff, right?
Right.
You're not meditating while at a football game, right?
Right.
And even if you were, the whole point would be like you're trying to block out. So you are trying to limit your senses. You're trying to go more internally, and you're not, you're going from active to passive. So instead of actively doing things, and you couldn't meditate while playing tennis. So you're trying to get to a passive spot, and then there's the breathing and you closing your eyes. And sometimes I meditate with my eyes open, sometimes I don't. I think just getting to that the quiet, the walking down, and there does seem to be, a being by yourself a little bit. You don't, meditating, so you don't try to meditate while having a conversation, right? That doesn't seem. So it is like shutting things down, getting down the sensory. Breathing's obviously a big part of it, but I think those are the pieces that seems to make it, or at least it makes it for me. I don't know.
But sometimes, but if somebody writes a book called like Meditation, so are we assuming that those are the insights that came during that state, and now he's sharing it with the world?
Oh, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, and it's the reason I'm asking is because you mentioned about intentionality while going into the flotation tank, right? So if you have no intention versus a goal to pursue, so the difference is there. There's a qualitative difference in your experience there.
I did it just because for me, if I didn't do it, my brain would go to places I wasn't happy with,
Right.
and sometimes could go down very dark and terrible things. And that wasn't pleasant. It was like, oh, I just went down into I followed the wrong yellow brick road, and I'd have a very bad, we called them floats,
Yeah.
but I'd have a very bad float. I'd come up being stressed and angry and upset because I've been thinking about, death or abandonment or whatever, or, disease or whatever it was for also for the amount of time, right? So I don't even know how much time it is. So I just, after that happened to me once, I was like, hey, this is such an incredible time for your brain to sort of problem solve.
Yeah.
That why don't you just give it something to problem solve? Why don't you give it, intentionality? And that's why I always brought a couple, because just in case my brain, and I know it's strange, I keep talking about my brain like it's not part of me, but like in some ways it isn't. I mean, this is the thing. If I say elephant, you're now thinking about elephant. You can't stop yourself from thinking about elephant. It's impossible.
Yeah.
So your brain is kind of not in your full control. But if I figured if I gave it a couple things, a couple issues, and things that I was happy about or excited about, or maybe just struggling with, I was struggling with a decision or struggling with I actually do the same thing now. I just don't do it in a float tank. But I'll give it a topic. Here's a topic, go for it, right? Just go for it. Do that visioning thing, do that brainstorming thing, do it by yourself, do it in a tank, but at least have a topic to go down. And then sometimes the brain will go way off, of course, and then you have to bring it back.
Yeah.
And say, I've been thinking about this, and then it'd be like, and tree, and thing, and in the house, and now you want, wait. I want you to stay on this topic. Which happens, that's what happens in brainstorming. But even in a good brainstorming session, if the guy's like, hey, well, where should we go to lunch? It's like, hey, no, let's stay on the product, right? We're trying to brainstorm around this product or whatever. But it is funny because I do a version of it now without the sensory, but I try to take it at a time where I don't have a lot of things around me. And if I want to sort of get all this stuff out of my head, do a mind sweep, I will do it at a point where I'm not being distracted, where it is quiet, where I don't have music playing, I don't have a lot going on. And then I'll say, all right, brain, here's the thing I want you to try to figure out, and then just start writing and going.
So a tactical question then, if you are going with that kind of let's say problem statement, and then your brain starts, thinking and giving you insights. And now I'm like, where's my pen and paper? So, so what do you do then? Like, you just collect it, let go?
Yeah, so that is the hardest part of the flotation tank, was that there is no way to capture any of it.
Yeah.
And so I did have to, and as a GTD person, like not capturing is kind of like, spit on David Allen's grave, he's still alive. But like it's the worst thing to do as a GTD person, to not capture. And once you get into that habit of capturing, you just want to capture constantly. Even now, like I can feel myself like, oh, I should be capturing some of this stuff, but I'm not doing it. I just had to come to an agreement with myself that like, if there was something good enough,
that it'll come back again.
Right, it'll come back. If you literally found the cure for cancer and you figured it out, that it's not going to disappear and you'll be able to come back to it. But it was hard. I would say that was the hardest part of doing that, and that's why maybe my practice now is all about capture, because I want to make sure I don't miss any of those things, because they are so. You can have incredible ideas, and I think maybe that practice taught me a little bit of, it's okay also not to have everything become permanent, and not to have everything that you think of become a commitment. And maybe, let's go back to that vision thing. Maybe that's the reason people struggle with visioning, because it becomes more commitments. And if you go in thinking, well, if I think all these things, then I have to do them all, which is where our society says, versus you can think all the things you want. And then you can decide if you want to do any of those things if you want. But if you want to do none of them, if you want to take that piece of paper, you just scribble it over. If you want to take the whiteboard, just wipe it out. That's okay too.
Yeah.
And giving yourself the freedom and the ability to say that allows for, you to not be afraid to capture. And that could be I want to capture the fact that I think being afraid to capture is part of what stops people from writing things down, because they think that they're committing to them.
Yeah.
And so maybe being in the tank was like, oh, you absolutely couldn't capture, zero way, like zero, and not even like a whiteboard. I mean, you can't see. So, and there's no Siri around, there's nothing. So it's interesting side point.
Yeah. So do you think, okay, so there are two things, like the writer mode and the editor mode. Now I'm going to talk about that in brainstorming and the issues people have, but the whole habit of capturing, I don't think it necessarily gets you out of the writer mode into the editor mode. I mean, unless you obsess about the grammar or whatever, because it's just you write some shorthand version of what thoughts are coming, and then you
Right.
move on. You start with thinking. What are your thoughts on this?
I, yeah, I mean, I think again, it's something that's like one of those habits you have to build because when you see people get stopped by the ability by doing things because they want to get it perfect,
Yeah.
because we live in that, Grammarly society where anything you put down on a piece of paper, I mean, if I showed you my handwriting, well, A, it's great because no one can read it, but like, I give myself all the break, right? So when I coach people on GTD, one of the things that I coach them on is the thing about removing the resistance to do something, right? The
Yeah.
friction, right? The more friction there is in between whatever you're doing now and the thing that you want to do, the
Mm.
more friction, the less chance you'll do it, right? The friction that of me going to a restaurant out tonight, I must be hungry. The restaurant out tonight in Long Island City, New York, and the friction between me going out to a restaurant tonight in San Francisco, right? There's an incredible different amount of friction.
Yeah.
There is friction for me leaving this apartment, right? But it's not, but going to San Francisco, I mean, massive amounts of friction, right? Flights and whatever. So when it comes to capture and doing that, removing all the friction is important. So some of
Mm.
it can be digital or technical friction. Some of it can be like where things are. Do I have enough places to do it?
Yeah.
And I think you're talking about is sort of the mental friction of, do I have to make it correct?
Mm.
Right? Do I have to make it perfect? Does it have to come out, in the right form, formed perfectly? And a lot of people just get caught up in that. It's like, I have to write it out the first time perfectly, therefore I won't do it, because there's that mental friction of having to capture that or put it out. But you have to learn the habit. You have to recreate. You have to give yourself a break. You have to reprogram your brain to be like, this first copy. There's also a theory about the first crappy copy when you're
Mm.
writing something. Just write a crappy copy. Say, literally, I'm going to write the worst version of this essay right now. It's going to be the worst. And so, but giving yourself the permission to do that. So maybe I'm just going to capture all the really terrible, stupid things that don't mean anything. But
Yeah.
I'm okay with that. It doesn't mean I'm committing to them. It doesn't mean I have to do them. It doesn't mean that they are real in the universe. And I can give myself permission and the time. And I think that's super important. Give yourself that time to be able to do that and to write the crappy draft or to capture the thing that doesn't make sense or to spell it terribly because you never wanted to spell. Doesn't matter. It's just for you. And your brain honestly doesn't care. It
Yeah.
doesn't care. It's getting it out is the thing, not if it's gotten out perfectly.
Right. Right. So here, then are we saying that this is kind of a dance between the conscious and the subconscious brain, and we are trying to deploy the subconscious brain in order because it's a great generator, but to
Yeah.
our ends.
Yeah. I mean, you can't get to that subconscious brain if the conscious brain is constantly worrying about all the little things. This is the like lower, now you're getting into like the lower levels of GTD, which is you can't get to that creative piece, that subconscious that can do all these really wonderful, thoughtful, creative stuff
Hmm.
if you're constantly worrying about buying cat litter and milk and this thing, right? So the GTD version of that is, that's why the weekly review has 3 steps. It's get clear, get current, get creative is the
Yeah.
end. If you can get through those first 2, if you can get clear and current, then that's when you can get creative because all that other stuff is handled. It's hard to think about, big, awesome thoughts and visions and things if your brain is really worried about every little thing or trying to at least remember. Your brain's always going to worry about everything because that's what it does.
Yeah.
But if it's trying to hold 5 or 6 thoughts, I need to do this, 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 and this, and it keeps going through that circle, it's never going to be able to go off and do these other big things. And it took so long in my practice to get from, the first 2 horizons
Yeah.
to get up the thing almost 10 years. And then eventually, after years of capturing and projects and doing all the low level stuff, I was able to go, maybe now I can think about bigger picture things. I can think about like why I want to be on this planet or what are bigger things I want to get done or, where is, and the nice thing is once you get into that, you can stay there for a while and you can really get out those bigger, maybe the stuff that's you're not thinking about every day and shouldn't think about every day. Like you should not wake up every morning and be like, I need to think about why I'm on this planet. Once in a while, think about it, but then go off and do all the stuff you need to do.
When your mind is clear and you've done it often enough, and I'll just share my story, like properly doing GTD a year and a half. Uh, I went through episodes where my mind was like, I'm worried because I don't know what to be worried about. And how do you tackle that if you've been gone through that, of course?
I don't know. My brain gets clear, but does not get to the point where there's nothing on it. I mean, it's always got something, this something like, what is it, 70 to 100,000 thoughts a day your brain has.
Okay.
A lot. Yeah. We don't know it because we don't capture them all,
Hmm.
obviously.
Yeah.
And
Thank God.
I would not want a transcript of everything that's going on in my brain from the minute I woke up to the minute I went. You wouldn't want that. That would be weird. Someday we'll get it. I, I don't know. I wouldn't want it, although it'd be kind of fascinating. But yeah, I mean, I would say when I get clear enough in my GTD system, one of the things is when I get down to a level, to me, it's how many projects I have.
Hmm.
I learned that my stress levels in life, and this is where I've kind of put my own sort of analytics on top of my GTD system,
Hmm.
which is that I look at how many projects, active projects I look at. In the way that I define them. Because
Hmm.
again, you can define projects as one project. You have one project in life called life, and
Hmm.
that's it. Everything's a sub-project. Or you could say there's millions of projects for everything you do. I'm in somewhere in the middle. But as part of my week review, as part of my practice, I look at the number of projects that I have kind of on my plate because it allows me to go, is that too much or too little? I came to this many, many years ago when I was obsessing with like, well, how much capacity do you have? Like, can you handle 50 projects, 100 projects, 200 projects? And so I started looking at my week review at the beginning and the end and in the week and saying, okay, how many active projects do I have? And at first it was like, I wanted to keep it under 100. And then at the end of my week review, I'm like, well, I still feel like that's too many. And over years and years and years and years, and I look every single week. I don't actually write it down, but I look every week at the number. And I've now realized it's between 20 and 50.
Right.
20, under 20, if I look at my week review and I'm done and I have 20, I'll tell you, my brain will be like, hey, I got to pick something up. I don't have enough.
Hmm.
If I'm over 50 and it's my goal to get under 50, I can handle that. That's about where my stress levels and my commitment levels, and I can give enough time and attention to enough of those projects. And I've done the math on it, and it makes sense if you think
Hmm.
about every project having one next action, and every next action is between 2 and 20 minutes, and you have a week. Like you think about it, it makes sense.
Yeah.
And if you want to leave yourself time to do work that you don't know is coming,
Hmm.
but that's how I kind of measure my where I am and what's the health of my commitment score, I guess I would call it.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is personal, or can you extrapolate this for others as well?
It's for me. I've told people, look, it's kind of easy
Yeah.
to figure out, like, where do you look at your set of projects and go, oh, I'm like feeling overwhelmed. Your brain is really good
Hmm.
at giving you the clues of like what looks like what overwhelms you or not.
Right.
If you look at 2, you go, two. You look at 10, you're like, 10. You
Hmm.
look at 30, you're like, 30, if I said, here's 1,000 things, I could even tell you your stress levels will go, oh, you have 1,000 projects that you
Yeah.
have to, oh, God, I
Yeah.
can't even process that many. So I think everybody should be in that world. I think, if you think about it, it makes sense, right? If for that week, if your upcoming week, if you're thinking and planning about your work, if you're reviewing what's on your plate, you can only do so much next week. If you want to sleep, if you want to eat, if you want to go to the gym, you can only handle so much work. So it really breaks down to like, okay, you can only handle this many projects. I just think it's not part of what David Allen talks about, but I think it's a great like additive to the practice is getting the analytics behind it.
Yeah.
It'd be great then if I could, measure my stress, right? And I could then align that stress through maybe something measurable coming off my watch or whatever to my, OmniFocus projects, and I could graph it and be like, oh, look, it's exactly here. I can see the graph. Oh, you got up to 65 active projects, and that's when your stress went up to a 4.2,
Hmm.
and, by the end of your weekly review, you were down to, you got down to 42, and here's your stress level is down. And there's we could put an analysis between the two.
Yeah, I think this I guess habit also sharpens your intuition over time, and you can trust yourself more when you want to say no, who you want to say no to, and if you want to say no to yourself, because if you're the kinds who wants to do everything, then you want to rein that in because man with limitations and all that.
Yeah, you can't say no to things unless you know what's on your plate. I mean, that's just the
Yeah,
basic. That's a
yeah,
GTD thing we talk about all the time.
yeah,
Saying no is impossible, and if you don't know what else you have.
yeah.
So, and people do all the time. That's why people are mostly stressed out,
Hmm.
why they're overcommitted, why they procrastinate on stuff is because they overcommit and because they can't say. And I try to train people on this. Is like there is no extra time in your life. Like
Yeah,
literally, you only have 24 hours. That's it. You don't have 25. You don't have, right? You only have 24 hours a day. You only have 7 days a week. You only have, 52 weeks a year, and you only have maybe 90 to 100 years on this planet. That's it.
yeah.
There's no more. And if you ask anybody where they are right now and said, "Hey, today, are you like, do you have a lot of free time?" I mean, most anybody, I don't know anybody, be like, "Yeah, I got tons of free time." I'll think most people feel wherever they are that they've got all the stuff. So if you're going to take on anything new, I
Yeah.
just say, ask yourself, what would you be willing to give up?
Hmm.
Are you willing to give up a little sleep? Are you willing to give up your workout? You're willing to give up your meal? You're willing to give up time with your kid? You're willing to give up, your favorite hobby? Because it gets down to that ones and zeros.
Yeah.
And the other thing is everybody underestimates what the time commitment for everything is.
Hmm.
People think, oh, it's just a this. And when you get really good at GTD, you start asking.
Hmm.
I ask people when I'm going to make a commitment, when someone comes to me and says, "Hey, I'd like you to be on the board of blah, blah, blah," or
Hmm.
could you help out with this? My first question is, what's the time commitment?
Yeah.
What is the time commitment? Are we talking like, what do you need from me? Do you need like 4 seconds every 1 year? Sure, no problem. Do you need, what are we meeting once a month? Okay, but what are we not doing? We're doing meetings. Are there emails? Are there things? Are there things I have to approve? Because most everything takes more time than people are willing to admit.
Yeah.
And we're not really good at scoping. And it's funny because we scope a lot at work, but we're not really good at scoping out commitments
Hmm.
and saying how long things take and how much I can fit into my life. So then we're always overcommitting because we're just really bad at it as humans.
Yeah.
Which you can get better at, but you kind of always have to ask that question: what am I willing to get up to give up to take on this thing?
So that word scoping, the brainstorming in the natural planning model, and also in the basic GTD model, the capture, essentially is the same thing, right? You are doing mind maps, capturing it, but in a diagrammatic way because it might make some sense to have affinity groups. Is that the reason that we want a mind map and not really just a running list?
I mean, I think a mind map. The reason the mind map works is because it is broken out, and people, again, we talk about like habits and where people get freaked out. They start writing things, and then they think it's a priority order, and it's a
Right.
thing. It's not. And to add to that thing, well, now I have to go up above it, and I have to use my keyboard or whatever. So that's why lists sometimes get people, to get them caught,
Hmm.
and all of these are just tricks to uncatch your brain and to let it do its different work. It's one of the fascinating things that I've learned is that different modalities of where you are, where you're sitting, what you're using will bring out different thoughts.
Hmm.
And so there is a difference between mind mapping on a piece of paper in front of you like this, on a computer screen like this, on a whiteboard like that, or out with a piece of chalk, out on the ground. Your brain does work differently. It does come
Hmm.
up with new stuff. So I challenge people, like, don't always just sit with your own modality of whatever you do. Try a different one. Go to a
Yeah.
different place. You will definitely have different thoughts. I find even I get caught up in my system. I like to do it in my one area in my house. And I'm like, sometimes break that up. Like go out for a walk, go sit in the park, bring a piece of paper, bring two different types of paper. I
Hmm.
have a stack over here, funny enough, 5, 6 different types of paper. I
Right.
have lined paper, unlined paper, scrap paper, small paper, little paper, big paper, because I find sometimes that will free up some sort of thought sometimes. Like, oh, I've only got this tiny little piece of paper.
Hmm.
Well, then I'll take tiny little notes or lines or no lines. Sometimes it creates different writings or different capturing. It's fascinating. I don't know. That could be a whole different thing too. It's like, why does different paper sizes and colors and things on it create different pathways for your brain to capture things or to
Uh,
come up with ideas.
Maybe it switches the brain to some kind of a curiosity mode. Because I remember I take a lot of walks with my wife around my neighborhood, and sometimes when we discover a new street, I discover I'm not tired anymore. And then I went back to the familiar road, I'm tired again. So
Oh, really? That's
yeah,
interesting.
yeah, that tends to happen. Okay.
Yeah.
The writing mode versus the editing mode question again, people
Okay.
censoring themselves, or maybe they're not really censored, but maybe it's a stupid idea. Maybe I don't want to put this up. It's not formed correctly. How do you coach people to, drop that mentality while they're just doing the brainstorming? Because editing is going to come later.
Yeah, I when I coach them, I just say it's just for you. It's the bad draft. It's
Hmm.
not for somebody else. I was watching a thing with Seth Godin the other day. I've been repeating this quote all the time because I really appreciated it. Someone asked him, Seth Godin, written 22 books, great author. Read The Dip. It changed my life.
Hmm.
He talked about someone asking questions and said, "What's the most influential book in your life?"
Right.
And the answer, and he thought about it. I love when interviewers think. I don't think I even do it as much as I should. Like I don't pause and really process it. But he goes, "The most influential book in your life is the book you write." I was like, my mind blew, and I was like, "Wow, that is so true." And then he said, "But most people don't write their book because they think about who's going to read it,
Right.
and they think about the audience, and they think about why they're writing it, and they think about it's going to have a cool color, and is someone going to pay them and whatever." But if everybody just wrote their book,
Yeah.
just write your book and not think about anybody else in the world reading it,
Hmm.
then you're going to write a different book. And
Yeah.
it's probably going to be very influential for whatever book you then write. So I'll then throw that onto the GTD practice. Capturing isn't about anybody else on the planet. That's why I try to let people, that's why I actually think shared software, like, sharing and all that, I think software should have some ability to share, especially for different modalities, for collaboration and for project management, definitely different tools. But a really good system for yourself, for your trusted system, I don't think should be shared. I think your trusted system, right? So your calendar, your task list, your notes, whatever, shouldn't be shared because it should be as sacred as your brain and your thoughts.
Right.
And it'd be like having someone be able to read your thoughts. And
Hmm.
your thoughts are kind of kooky and they think some really strange stuff sometimes. And you're like, oh, I'm glad no one's reading my thoughts right now. But I think that's where your trusted system and your practice of capturing should be, is that kind of private and thinking, again, it's not about the grammar. It's not about what I wrote down. It's not about if I got it right. It's not about if I wrote down something bad but if you can give yourself that break and you can say, this is just for me and it doesn't have a lot of meaning until I want it to have meaning,
Hmm.
then people are more apt to like let those things go. That, and again, just, don't like the expression, but by emphasizing time.
Yeah.
People don't give themselves enough time to do this. They just don't. I know them. I know everybody. I know all the people in my life. I know the people who are really good at this practice, and the people who are really good regularly give themselves time to do this,
Right.
to quiet, to sit, to do a GTD meditation where they just like do a mind sweep or do a point or just capture stuff and everybody else is running around with their heads chopped off.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah, well, I mean, you do this often enough, your actual meditations also get better because there is not much chatter when, when you're trying to get there. That's what you're trying to get to anyway.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And it can stop your meditation. I mean, that's the other thing. It's like, if I'm sitting there doing a breathing exercise for 5 minutes, my
Mm.
watch can do that, tells me to do that. And I have an idea. If I want, I can stop and be like, okay, like I don't
Yeah.
have to, let me stop, let me write down the idea, and then we go back and do it again. So
Yeah.
it's so much about this is just giving yourself a break. It is one of the biggest GTD coaching things I do is like give yourself a break.
Yeah.
You can slow roll this. You don't have to do it all at once.
Yeah.
Don't try to become a GTD master in a month. Slow roll it. Try to learn one habit. Read The Power of Habit. You learn it takes the time. It takes over a month of constantly doing something over and over again daily before you become good at it, or at least become something that's part of you.
Hmm.
I think that's probably, I mean, he has the science, but realistically, it takes a long time to get something so embedded in you that
Hmm.
you're just going to do it, whether someone tells you or reminds you or whatever. So these habits, that's all the GTD is. It's just a bunch of little habits. These habits take us such a long time to take hold. When they do, it's great. But most people get very frustrated, the instant satisfaction of having things happen now. And, I tried it and it didn't work. It's like, well, how long do you try it? Well, I tried it for a day. Like, no, like you need to do the 10,000 hour things of outliers, right? These things take time. So I think that's where people get the most frustrated and kind of jump off the bandwagon fast.
Yeah. Okay. Last section, quick section.
Sure.
Can you just summarize the bullet points again for the natural planning model as if you were giving somebody a handout? So it's vision.
Sure. So you start off with your purpose and principles. That is, and again, it's kind of hard because what is my purpose and principle? I think that's why I didn't start with it. Really, I kind of left it out because a lot of people get caught up in that, right?
Yeah.
But in theory, if you're in a project meeting, if you're at a company, an organization, you're taking on digital transformation, or you're going out to dinner or having a wedding or going on a vacation, like you should start off with a little bit of, what it is we're trying to accomplish and what we agree on. I think David Allen does a really good thing on vacations. But anyway, so if you're going on a vacation, a family should sit together and say, what do we want to get out of this vacation? What are the purpose? What are our principles for vacation? Okay, we want to have fun, we want to bond, and to sit there and then go and do the visioning. So you start with the purpose and principles. That's just aligning who you are and why you're doing these things. Most of that's sort of done by the organization or yourself. Then you're doing the vision. You're thinking of that outcome on the end. What does this look like? You can close your eyes. You could write it down. You could write the Wall Street Journal story, the New York Times bestseller article, whatever the trick you want to use. I've seen 100 of them, but you're just doing that little go out there and imagine it. What's the outcome look like? Generally, is a positive one, although it could be like to solve something that's negative. And I think don't always think of it as like, oh, it's fairy tale. Like maybe it's I want to lower my my cholesterol by 100 points or whatever. And then, so you do the purpose and principles, you do the visioning, then the brainstorming. The brainstorming is just allowing the space, whether it's a minute or two, or a 2-hour session, or a 1-week offsite, for the whole company that you're just brainstorming. That's allowing yourself to get all the stuff out, mind mapping, capturing, writing down, doesn't matter. Get all your stuff out.
Yeah.
And you organize it. Okay, got all this stuff out. What are these things? Now you can throw out the stuff that doesn't make sense, organize them, put them into more priorities or put them into lists or whatever. Again, whatever makes sense for the size and the complexity of the project. And then the next one is just come up with the actions. What is the very next action or the very next actions that need to take place that are physical and visible that I can do in under 20 minutes that will kick this thing off. And sometimes that's, throwing a calendar invite. Sometimes it's picking up the phone and calling a friend. Sometimes it's texting, but it has to be physical and has to be visible. Keep it in the 20-minute realm and see where it goes.
Okay, awesome. And finally, someone else I follow in the GTD world suggests that, your visions, try and make them 51% believable. So because if it's 100% believable, it's boring. And if it's too unbelievable, you're not motivated. What are your thoughts on this?
That's interesting. I never thought the believability of them. I would know. I would think you want to make sure that they're doable. Like you want to make sure it's realistic. But honestly, so many people have done some of the greatest things that when they were visioning them, I think they would be 100% unbelievable, right? I think probably putting people into space and on the moon was unbelievable. And so if someone had stopped there and said, "Hey, we're going to go to the moon," they go, "Nah." Right, that's like 49%. Forget it. So I think there's some truth to it, but allow yourself to go bigger on that, especially because you're not committing to it, right? If you're really talking about putting someone on Mars, you're not saying I guarantee there will be someone on Mars.
Yeah.
But if we can't get to those kind of great outside the box thinking, if we can't vision outside of what we already know, I might not be saying I'm having dinner tonight in France because that's like, it's a little bit outside.
Right.
But it's not impossible. There are planes that go very fast and could get over there. I guess.
Are we getting rockets?
Yeah, and maybe getting rockets. And, they used to have the Concorde. You could get over there in like 3 hours. So
Yeah. Okay. Jason, this has been great. Thank you very much. You got any parting thoughts?
No, I just love having the conversation. I love going down the other path. It's the thing that's not talked about as much. The natural planning model is something that is not kind of dug into as much. It's much more on that control side because it's what people mostly suffer from is
Yeah.
just the amount of stuff in their life. So I'm glad we got a chance to hit down a whole nother pillar.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Yeah, bye.